What do you think holds people back from taking that risk and pursuing their dream life?
I think pre-start self-intimidation is the number one driver of inaction. And what I mean by that is when you are standing where you are in life and you want to change your life, you want to create some transformation, you know that where you are isn't where you want to end up. There's a gap between your present reality and the expectations you have for yourself. That manifests as you standing in one position and this enormous wall in front of you. And on the other side of that wall is the life that you want to go build for yourself and live. And seeing that wall in front of you, you cannot possibly imagine how you are going to climb up it, how you are going to get to the top of that wall. And so what people do is they do nothing. They won't take a single action because it's too intimidating to think about getting to the other side. You can't imagine what you're going to have to do it. It's going to take thousands and thousands of days or actions. And the reality is that it doesn't really matter what thousands of actions you need to take. You need to just do the one. And most people will stop before even doing the one action. And what you learn, and people that have changed their life have learned, is that the one action is actually worth much more than that because it creates the little momentum. And you start to have that winning sensation, and that builds, and the momentum builds. But that pre-start self-intimidation holds back people from building the life that they really want.
Yeah, and I also think that people associate having a dream life with being rich and wealthy. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I know you've had your experience with this. So talk a bit about why people should still pursue happiness and fulfillment and the life they want despite the fact that they're not rich and wealthy.
I just think it's about defining the things that you truly care about. And that whole idea of being wealthy, this is really the thesis of my book, is that the definition of wealth culturally is financial. It's money. It's the number on the scoreboard for you. And what I'm trying to get across in this book is that a wealthy life may involve money, but ultimately it's defined by a lot more. It's defined by your freedom, your time. It's defined by the people that you have around you, the strength of your relationships. It's defined by your purpose, your calling, the things that you're working on. It's defined by your health physically, and it's defined by money. But it's the combination of all of those things that you really need to be building towards. And so the call to action is you can't just invest in your financial wealth and expect to have all of those other things. You have to invest in all of them in the same way that you think about your financial wealth. You have to understand that all of those areas of your life compound over long periods of time. And they require investments because if you don't, they atrophy. If you don't invest in your relationships, you aren't going to have those people in your life. If you don't invest in your health is not going to be there for you later in life. So recognizing that early and building those things into your life is essential if you're going to end up in the place where you want to be.
Right. And I think a lot of people get tripped up because they're like, well, I need to get rich first, or I need to be financially free or debt free or be able to make enough money to provide for my family before I can invest heavily into my health, invest heavily into relationships, because at the end of the day, people need money to survive. And I think that message at times gets lost in the self-help space where we talk about the importance of these other things besides money, which totally agree, incredibly important. But at the end of the day, people still need to pay their bills, right? Talk about some simple steps you think people can take that can move the lever the most. If they're sitting there, it's the beginning of the year, they're like, crap, last year wasn't my best year yet. I'm trying to figure out how I can make some improvements. What do you think are the things that move the needle the most?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say, by the way, to your point is I completely agree that building a baseline level of financial wealth is extraordinarily helpful for feeling like you are able to live a happy, healthy, wealthy life, right? Being able to cover your baseline needs, being able to unburden yourself of some of those stresses is really important. And without that, you're never going to feel a level of safety or comfort. And so I actually do tell people that in your 20s and 30s, it's a great time to be focusing on and having a season of financial wealth building. But the important thing to understand is that these other areas of your life cannot be flipped entirely off. Because what happens is you will focus so narrowly on the one, the financial wealth, that everything else will atrophy and you'll be in a very, very bad spot as a result. So I think that the key is to view all of these areas of life as existing on a dimmer switch. Think about the fact that you can be focused on and building towards a life of financial wealth, but then also take small, tiny actions that are compounding, that are moving the ball forward in these other areas of your life. So if it's your physical wealth, your health, your body, move your body for 30 minutes a day. You might be in a season of life where you are so super focused on your career and on building a baseline of financial wealth, but you can find the time to go for a walk for 30 minutes. You can find the time to go for that jog or do the weightlifting or whatever it is, 30 minutes a day. In your relationships, just send the text, make the phone call to the person. Don't allow the relationships to just be something that falls by the wayside as you're focusing on building money. So it's just about learning to just take those tiny actions that will push the ball forward, with the idea being anything above zero compounds positively, but it has to be above zero. You have to do something for it to compound positively into your future.
A lot of your background is from the financial world, being in private equity and stuff, and you talk about like having this baseline of financial like wealth, well-being. Like, what does that look like for most people? Because I think that people assume that you just have to be, again, debt-free, saving a bunch of money. Like, what do you think that threshold is for people to hit?
I don't think there's a specific number you can give. I mean, if you go look at the research on money and happiness, every study you look at will say a different number. It's $75,000 was the first number from Daniel Kahneman's famous study on this of happiness starts to see diminishing returns with increases above that. But if you live in New York City, that number is clearly higher versus Omaha, Nebraska versus Mississippi, London. It depends where you live and it depends on your financial circumstances. But it's very clear that above a certain baseline level, there are diminishing returns. These other areas of life are what's going to bring you incremental happiness. I think that the key and really the basic model that anyone follows to build financial wealth is effectively three simple things. It's growing your income, so growing cash inflows, managing your cash outflows, your expenses, so that there's a gap between the two. And ideally, that gap grows over time because your income grows faster than your expenses. And then investing that gap into things that compound over long periods of time. For most people, that's literally just investing it into index funds, low cost, tax efficient index funds over long periods of time. If every single month you just manage that gap and invest it, you will build a life of financial wealth. It's just going to happen over time because compounding is just returns to the power of time. And time is the exponent. So if you just focus on that, staying in the market for long periods of time, you will build a life of financial wealth. But no one wants to hear that because it's not sexy. That doesn't sound like a fun, attractive way to go and get rich, right? Everyone wants the fast, the get rich quick, the shortcut, the hack, when the reality is the boring basics are what work.
When it comes to things like relationships, I know that you've had conversations with Robert Waldinger. He ran I think it's the adult development study out of Harvard, the longest study on happiness. I think their study also talks about the relationship between money and happiness and how there is diminishing returns after a certain point. But what have you learned about the value of personal and romantic relationships as it pertains to happiness?
I think that who you choose to partner with in life is the single most important decision you will ever make. The person that you partner with determines your happiness or misery that you experience. And there is scientific evidence that the strength of your relationships is the single greatest predictor of your health later in life. So the person that you choose to partner with is the one person that you are spending more and more time with over the course of your life. And I just think that in the modern era, especially in the social media age, a lot of young men are being fed this message that is very unhealthy around marriage, relationships. I think that that's a very sad thing because we're losing sight of the fact that your partnership with the person that you love can be such an enormous accelerant for everything that you're trying to pursue in life. And I attribute any success that I've had in my life to my wife. And I'm so grateful for her role in my life and for the balancing effect that she's played and for the incredible role that she plays in raising our son. I just think that at the end of the day, everything comes down to that one relationship.
Yeah. What message is it that you're seeing being spread to young men that you think is blatantly wrong?
That you shouldn't get married because it is a distraction, or that women are not, on par with men. And I'm not going to name names because it's just not what I do in the content that I put out. But there is a message that is being clearly pushed by certain groups of people out there that is attractive to, lost 20-year-olds that think that like the key to life and happiness is the fancy watch and the cars and the yachts and private jets, and that like, having a bunch of Instagram models, by their side is going to make them happy in the long run. And time and time again, research and science has shown the opposite. And anecdotally, we know the opposite from talking to people that have lived long, healthy, wealthy lives. And yet, these are the things that get clicks on social media. And so it's the message that gets spread. And it's not as sexy to tell the message of like, building stable, long-term, loving relationships is the way to live a healthy life. Yeah. But it's the truth. And I try to do my part in some ways to spread that message, but it's an uphill battle, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's clearly a lot of evidence on the importance of having deep, meaningful relationships, and I think quality over quantity when it comes to that. And yet people continue to pursue superficial relationships that add no value to their life, even though they already deep down somewhere inside of them, they know like, this is not making me a better person. This is a distraction. It's instantly gratifying, and that's about it. Why do you think people struggle to form deep connections with people, like real connections, despite the overwhelming evidence for it?
I think there's probably a few reasons. I mean, one, we live in a day and age where so much of our desire is sort of handed to us by social media. And I think our phones are like the worst drug that we have access to and that we're all quite addicted to. I mean, social media has convinced you that you should want to be someone else, somewhere else, with someone else. Like that everything in your life is broken and that everyone else out there has the perfect life. And in relationships, in particular romantic relationships, we've lost sight of the importance of growing in love and had this obsession with like the falling in love phase. And what I mean by that is falling in love is very, very easy. Growing in love is very hard. Falling in love is like the, Instagram perfect photos of the vacation and the fancy dates and the, manicured images and videos of your life. That's really not what life is. Life is mostly just sitting on the couch doing nothing. And that's the growing. That's the moments where things are tough, where you're struggling, where you have hard conversations, where you're working through challenges with someone. And that's where real love is built. It's through that shared struggle that we know scientifically releases oxytocin. It releases the chemical that creates feelings of love and connection. But people aren't willing to go through that because they think that love is those fancy moments.
And so what are your top tips or things you've learned about how people can grow in love?
You have to embrace delayed gratification. And that's not just a top tip for relationships. That's for all of life. I mean, delayed gratification is the key to living a meaningful life because everything that you want in life is on the other side of something you don't want to do. It's on the other side of 100 hard conversations in the case of relationships. It's on the other side of 100 hard workouts or bland meals in the case of your physical health. It's on the other side of 100 hours of focused work in the case of whatever you want to build professionally. None of those things are easy or particularly fun or exciting to do in the short term, but they create the outcomes you want in the long term. And so being willing to embrace delayed gratification as a core value in your life, I think is the top tip you can give anyone if you want to go and change your outcomes.
Right. And what do you say to people who say, well, I need the instant gratification to like motivate myself and create willpower to make a long-term change?
You're never going to make it in life if you need instant gratification, unfortunately. It's like, it sounds harsh, but the reality is instant gratification culture is what leads to everybody's demise. And I would argue that motivation and needing motivation to do things is really going to hold you back. What you really need to do is you just need to sort of act and feel the momentum that gets built from that. And that starts to be a positive, self-fulfilling prophecy. You can create motivation by seeing some momentum. Confidence is built, not born. So if you can go and take one action, like if you can wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning and go work out when you're not in a happy place in your life and you go do that, you'll feel a little different after doing that. It'll suck when you go and do it that morning. You will not want to wake up early and go and do the thing, go do the workout or go sit at your desk and do the work or whatever it is. But after, you will feel really good and you'll look at yourself in the mirror a little bit differently and you'll feel a little bit different about yourself. And that creates a level of motivation for the next day and the next day and the next day after that. So if you can just create the little catalyst in your life, the little spark, you can snowball off the back of that and create an enormous change.
I want to come back to compounding like small wins and building confidence and discipline. But I want to close the loop first on like this aspect of social wealth and friendships. I know you talk a lot about this idea of the darkest hour friends, which I think is incredibly important for people to grasp and understand. But I'd love to hear like you explain what it is and why people should really, really focus on this.
Sure. Most of your friends aren't really your friends. They're just along for the ride when it's fun, convenient, or valuable, and they'll be gone when it's none of those things. Your real friends are the ones who are there for you when you have nothing to offer them in return. When your company went bankrupt, when you were down and out, when you're sick, when you can't offer anything. Those are your darkest hour friends. And you need to find them and you need to cherish them. And most importantly, you need to be one to someone else.
How can you become a better friend?
I think that being a better friend is just about showing up for people. Just being willing to say, I'm with you during those tough moments. There's a big focus on like these grand shows of friendship and appreciation and like trying to give someone advice when they're in a tough spot or when they experience a loss or when they're grieving something or they're experiencing one of those waves or dark periods. And I've always found that in those moments, advice is minimally useful. Mm-hmm. What people really want to know is that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And just being told I'm with you during those periods provides enormous strength. And the reality is people never forget those who were there for them during those tough moments. When you think about your own life, the people that were there for you during your most challenging times, when you were sitting in the darkness, the people that were just willing to sit there with you in the mud are the people that you never forget. I have a very clear memory of one of my dearest friends from college, one of my roommates. His mother had passed away from ALS, a terrible year-long ordeal, awful disease. And after the funeral, I had to go back to work. And so I was driving back to my office, and halfway there, like they were having a few people go over to their house after, and I was going to have to go back to work. And I was halfway back to my office, and I just turned around and drove back. And I reflect on that a lot, thinking about, like, I have no idea what work I would have done that day sitting in the office. But I know how me going back and sitting with him after that had happened made him feel. And I know that the relationship that we have and the strength that we're going to have around that for 50 plus years to come. And so that's a microcosm of something much bigger, which is you're never going to remember what that little piece of work was that you missed by showing up for the people that you love and care about. So whoever those real people are, those people that really matter to you, that are going to be there over this 30, 40, 50 years that remain in your life, make sure you're showing up for them in those moments of need.
How do you think people can define whether or not they should keep somebody in their life or not?
I think it's hard to provide a conclusive test for something like that. I generally think that we need to tune into our energy a lot more when it comes to relationships. Your body doesn't really lie to you about things. Your head lies to you a lot. You're able to convince yourself. Like, I think of business deals all the time. The number of times I've gotten into trouble in something in business, it's almost always because I allowed my head to talk me into something when my gut had already said it was off and it was wrong. And that happens with relationships a lot. Like, you physically don't feel great after spending time with someone. You feel drained. They belittle you. They like sort of put the little digs, the little like deprecating comments, those little things. And yet you continue to tell yourself that like, oh, that's one of my friends and I need to spend time with them. Or like, oh, they're just like that. You know, that's just the way they are. Like, those are the things we say about family members that are demeaning towards us or ambivalent towards us. We say like, that's just the way they are. So we just allow them to persist. And I think that if someone is consistently making you feel physically unwell, it's probably a good sign that you shouldn't spend as much time with them. If someone is consistently creating energy in your life, making you feel uplifted, making you want to think bigger, making you believe you are capable of more, that's a great person to spend more time with, because a lot of good comes from that.
Right. And I think people have to also be like kind of careful too. I mean, and I agree with everything you just said. I think what's happened over the last probably 5 years in the self-help space is that people just assume, oh, I'm just not going to go to any like family events anymore. I'm just going to cut out everybody in my family, which, I mean, I think if there's things like abuse and stuff like that, obviously people need to set boundaries around that. But I think most of the time, like generally speaking, you just need to like kind of set a boundary where you're maybe not spending as much time with that person, because I think it's also unrealistic to just not associate with your family, right? And I also think people need to do some self-reflective work as well before they make decisions like that, because a lot of times you're the common denominator in all of this. If you're not taking care of yourself, if your self-esteem is poor, if you're not sleeping well, of course, like the way you show up in relationships and the way relationships appear to you is not going to be accurate, because you're not showing up as your best self either. Before we get into time, because I know that's something that you talk a lot about, and it's honestly like, if you think about it, it's the one like commodity in life we never get back is time. I saw like, I think it's like your most popular post on Instagram is about the time you don't want to lose with your son and the reason behind that. How can people prioritize time with their children without sacrificing the relationship with themselves or their spouse?
This is a topic that always hits people hard. It was originally, and I write about it in the book, there was this Reddit post that I came across that just said, the only people that will remember you working late 20 years from now are your kids. And the whole idea was like, you staying late at the office and working on these things for some boss that doesn't care about you. You're never going to remember what you were working on. They're never going to remember the thing you were doing, but your kids are going to remember you not being there. And I am of two minds on that, because on one side, I totally agree that like there is a 10-year window when you are your child's favorite person in the entire world. You are literally their favorite person in the entire world. And after that, they have new favorite people. They have best friends, boyfriends, girlfriends. They have their own spouses, their own children. You will never occupy that same place in their world. And yet we live in a world where that 10 years is also when we are told we're supposed to hustle the most and work the hardest and really push after our ambitions. So one side of me says, absolutely, that's true. I want to be present as possible during that window. But the other side says, it's really important for your children to learn the lesson that working hard on things you care about is important and is a value that they can embrace, because they learn from seeing you do things. They don't learn from you teaching them things. I mean, I learned my own work ethic and the discipline that I have from watching my dad and the way that he pursued things that he cared about. And so balancing that, the presence with the ambition, that's important as a lesson and also important to push after things that you really care about. That's sort of the natural tension that we're all trying to navigate. And I think that's the tension that you need to find your own balance point around. It's grounding yourself in, yes, I want to be present. I want to be there during this window of time that is so magical. But then also, I want to impart these lessons on my children that working hard on things we care about is important. And I think that balance comes down to including your children in the why. Meaning, if you don't explain to them why you aren't around, they fill it with the worst version. They'll fill it with, Dad doesn't want to be around. Dad doesn't care about me. Dad travels all the time. Dad's never here. And I really think that my dad did a great job of always making sure that I knew why he was doing the things he was doing, what he was working on, why it was important to him, why it was important to us as a family and the mission that we were on as a unit. And so I think about that a lot. So like just including your kids in the why of why you are doing things is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who have gotten divorced or are on the verge of divorce now, and I've asked them, like, what happened? And, like, the two common things that I hear, I mean, outside of, like, loss of connection, infidelity, stuff like that, there's two things that could pop up, and that is we spent way too much time, like, idolizing our kids, like, doing everything for the kids, where we forgot date night, we forgot to spend time by ourselves, or I was traveling so much for work, I was never home, I didn't, like, I worked so late every day that my spouse just thought I idolized my career more than our marriage or relationship with the kids. And so I think it's a tough balance, right? Because I think you're right in that if you don't prioritize your kids at all, like they're going to ask certain questions and have certain ideas. But then if you just say, well, just put us first, I think you just end up raising a super entitled kid who doesn't see the value of the hard work and the discipline and the consistency with that.
What you just said, by the way, on the spousal connection is a really important point, because I saw a stat that 80% of married couples say that their relationship got worse in the year after their child was born, which is a crazy statistic to think that like the happiest moment of your life ends up being the thing that for the vast majority of couples leads to the deterioration in their relationship. But the reason is fairly obvious. You suddenly have a thing, literally a thing, that is both of your primary focus. And It's very easy to lose sight of each other during that. I actually have a framework in the book this called the Life Dinner, which was originally I saw it from an investor named Brad Feld. And the whole idea is once a month, my wife and I have a dinner or date that is fixed where we get together and we sit down and make sure that we are talking about the things that we're focused on, the things we're excited about, our goals, our ambitions, whatever. But it's a focused time when you are just together and it's just the two of you, so that in the chaos of all of other things going on in life that especially is chaotic in the 6 to 12 months after your kid is born, you still find time for each other and to continue to build and develop that relationship.
I want to go back to time because I think this is something that people, they end up learning this lesson way too late in life. And we've talked about like certain regrets that could come if you don't invest in the right things. I know obviously not putting time into romantic relationships and people that you care about is like one of the biggest regrets people have on their deathbed. I know you've studied this a lot just from your own experience and your own passion for this. What are some of the other like uncomfortable life lessons that you think people end up learning too late in life?
The amount of time you have left with the people that you love most is much more finite and countable than you realize. This insight was the one that ended up leading to all of the changes in our life. I had a conversation in 2021 with an old friend. We were out for a drink and we sat down and he asked how I was doing. And I said that it was getting kind of tough being so far away from my parents who were getting older, health problems, living on the East Coast. We were on the West Coast. And he asked how old they are. And I said, they're in their mid-60s. And he said, how often do you see them? And I said, about once a year. And he just looked at me and said, okay, so you're going to see them 15 more times before they die. And I remember feeling like I had been punched in the gut. Like the idea that the amount of time you have left with your parents, with the people that you care about most in the world, is that countable, that you can put it on a few hands, was just jarring. And it led to these changes. The next morning I woke up and told my wife that I thought we needed to move. And within 45 days, we had sold our house. I had left my job and we had moved back to the East Coast to be closer to both of our sets of parents. And when I reflect on that today, it's a prime example of something really important, which is the idea that you can literally create time. We took that number from 15 to in the hundreds. I see my parents every other week now. At a minimum. They're a huge, huge role in my son's life, which they wouldn't have been. We get to experience extraordinary joy from all of the moments together. And that was an example of literally creating time by taking an action, by creating a change in our life. And I think that that is an uncomfortable truth and a reality that is rather empowering, actually, which is you can create time in the sense that you can create moments with the people you care about, or you can create moments for the things that you care about by taking actions. You have a lot more control than you really think.
What are some hacks, some small hacks people can do to buy back more time in their life?
Tuning into your energy more is a big one. I did something that I call an energy calendar, which is an exercise that I walk through in the book. Look at your calendar at the end of a work day and color code things according to whether it was energy creating, mark it green, energy neutral, mark it yellow, energy draining, mark it red. So like physically how you felt during and after the activity. And at the end of a week, if you do that every day, you get a very clear perspective for the activities that are generally creating energy in your life versus draining energy. If you are able to start slowly repositioning things and tweaking things so that you spend more time on energy creators versus energy drainers, your outcomes will improve and you will feel much better in doing it. So a simple example of a change is like Phone calls and Zooms are very energy draining for me. I knew that. I was spending way too much time on things just sitting at my desk. But what I noticed was a walking phone call was energy creating. I really love being outside, moving. I was much more focused on the call. I was present. And so I changed half my calls to being out on a walk. And suddenly my weeks felt significantly different. I showed up better on all of those calls, so the outcomes were much better. And it made a big improvement in my life. So making small changes that allow your weeks to be more green than red will actually allow you to drive bigger outcomes, more asymmetric outcomes on the exact same time base.
All right. So for the second half of the conversation, I want to focus on personal transformation. Imagine you go to zero with everything. No marriage, no kid, no job, nothing. And your life is in disarray right now. How would you convince yourself that things will get better?
I'd wake up at 5 a.m. and go work out.
Yeah.
And this sounds crazy, but it's the fundamental underlying principle here is physical wealth is a catalyst for everything else in your life. Because feeling lost, feeling stuck, feeling like your entire life is in disarray is fundamentally about not believing that you can take an action and create an outcome. If you believe that you can do that, if you believe that you are capable of doing something and it creating a desired outcome in your life, you can then go apply that to anything. You can take a bunch of outcomes, take actions, and then create the outcomes that you want. Physical pursuits are the fastest way to convince yourself that you are capable of that. And so it's the first thing that I say to anyone. If a young person approaches me and says that they're feeling lost in life, I tell them that for the next 30 days, wake up at 5 a.m. every single day and go work out. It has nothing to do with like getting jacked, being super fit, whatever. It has everything to do with rewiring your brain to convince yourself that you are a winner, that you can do a hard thing, that you're capable of much more than what you are doing today. And if you do that for 30 days, I guarantee you will feel like a different human on the other end of it. And that has ripple effects into everything that you do in life. So that would be the first thing that I would do, to just convince myself that I was capable of pulling myself out of that hole.
And typically when people are in a hole like that, their self-confidence. This episode is brought to you by Live On Labs. If you are someone who is constantly stressed, feeling depleted, and exhausted, I have some exciting news. My friends at Live On Labs have an incredible deal I can offer you. When you buy any product at full price, you get a free carton of their highly popular B-complex product, which I take every day. Taking a B-complex supplement can also help support things like a healthy metabolism, increased energy, blood sugar balance, and learning. Vitamin B supplements can help replenish nutrients depleted from stress. Live On Labs puts years of research into each product, which is why I stand behind them. Using liposome encapsulation technology, these products promote elite absorption so the supplements get into your cells and give you the best benefits that you're looking for. Right now, you can get a free carton of Lipospheric B Complex Plus, which is a $56 value with any full price purchase from liveonlabs.com. This supplement has the B vitamins and minerals that you need to help turn food into sustained natural energy throughout the day. Just add B Complex Plus and any other full price supplement to your cart and enter code BOPES24 at checkout to get this amazing deal. Now back to the show. And typically when people are in a hole like that, their self-confidence is in a hole as well. They don't feel good about themselves. They feel like they have nothing going for them. And so the thought of, doing something that's going to be delayed gratification, right? Because it's not like you feel immediately better. You're not looking in the mirror and being like, yeah, I see like incredible results like day one in the gym. But like you said, if you're doing it and breaking a pattern or breaking an unhealthy behavior, you're going to feel a little bit better. But with that said, like, how do you get somebody with no confidence to build discipline in things in life that aren't going to pay off immediately?
I think the biggest thing is that it happens faster than you imagine. It takes a long time to create dramatic change, but you'll see results faster than you imagine. I mean, if you can commit to 30 days, which is like, it's a month, just commit to 30 days. If you can do that, you will see dramatic change at the end of a 30-day period. I mean, you'll see a notch in your belt. You'll see a little more muscle definition in the mirror. You'll see that you feel different. You stand up a little bit straighter. There will be changes in you in a short period of time. And that is impactful in how you approach the world.
What other things would you recommend people do if they're trying to, like, again, use 30 days as an example, if there's somebody that is not in a good place in life or not where they want to be and they want to drastically change their life to be able to get towards their dreams, what other things should they start doing?
I think that's, ultimately, getting yourself out of a hole financially is about creating value. You get paid proportional to the amount of value that you create in the world for others around you. And so if you're trying to go and build a different financial future for yourself, that is about figuring out how you can create immense value for everyone around you. So if you have a job currently and you're not happy with how it's going, look around at the people that you work with on a daily basis, figure out what problems they have, figure out how you can solve those problems, and then go scale that solution. If you can just do that, identify a problem, create a solution, and then scale the solution, you can make a lot of money. You can do better than you're currently doing financially. And so I think that breaking things down to that level where you're like, okay, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I just literally need to figure out how I can create value for the people around me is a good way of just like deconstructing the problem to something that feels more manageable.
Yeah. And I think what also tends to happen is people have like regrets in life for how they've treated other people, how they've treated themselves, how they've dealt with things like failure. They feel like they're not enough. I know you talk about mental wealth, on your platform and in the book. How can people start to cultivate a better frame of mind about how they feel about themselves?
I think that one of the most important concepts that I talk about in the book is just this idea of creating space in your life. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and famous psychologist, talks about the fact that your power exists in the space between stimulus and response, meaning all of the stimulus that's coming in your life, and then the response is your action, what your response is to those things. And most of us live in this world where there's no space. It's just constant stimulus and constant response. But your power is in your ability to create space where you can choose your response, is what Frankl says. That is a really powerful idea for reframing your whole life. If you can just create moments, create little pockets of space in your day-to-day life, you gain this enormous power because now you can slow everything down. You can see the entire field and you can think about what is the right response to these things. You think about like Lionel Messi as a soccer player. He walks around the field all game and then suddenly he bursts into action. But it's not laziness, it's just strategy. He's slowing everything down so that he can see everything that's going on. He creates a map in his mind so that he can spark into action in the right moment at the right angle where it's going to actually lead to a good outcome. You can do that in your own life. You can create space. You can create little 5-minute pockets where you just breathe, where you go for a walk, where you pause. You can create bigger pockets on a quarterly or monthly basis where you take a day to just think about bigger picture questions in your life. The book has a whole bunch of these like self-reflection questions that you can ask yourself to kind of pull back from the day-to-day. But those ideas, I think, are really powerful for reframing how you think of yourself and how you think about your own interactions with the world.
Yeah. Something that comes up in conversations with friends of mine at times in talking about like personal development and personal growth is people will say, well, what if I'm just happy with my life? Like, what if I'm happy just, maybe in other people's view, living a mediocre life? What's your advice for people who think that way? And is there a way for people to get clear on if they're actually happy with like living a life that may not be as exciting to other people?
I think that the most important message of this entire book is your definition of a wealthy life is your definition. Yeah. It doesn't need to be everyone else's definition. I have zero desire to live the life of the people that we see on the cover of Forbes magazine. Zero desire. I mean, any history book about any famous business person or success story, I have zero desire to live those lives, right? The top 10 richest people in the world have 13 divorces among them. I have zero desire to live a very rich life, if that's what it means. If broken relationships with children and being, gone 300 days out of the year and all of these things, if that's the cost of achieving that life, I have zero desire to pay that. So the whole point of this book is to define what a wealthy life looks like to you and then go build your life around it. And I think one of the most important things that will come out of this book is that a lot of people who feel unsuccessful or not wealthy by traditional definitions, money, will feel much wealthier when they recognize that they have a lot of these other things. I mean, one of my best friends from college moved back to his hometown after school. He has a great Stanford degree and coaches high school sports and works like a, modest paying job. He's not living a fancy life, but He's super fit. He's outside all the time. He goes hiking. He lives close to both sets of their parents. They have 2 beautiful children. They have their house. They don't travel a ton. They don't do a whole ton. He doesn't make a ton of money, but he's extraordinarily wealthy by my definition. And he's extraordinarily happy and has a fulfilling life. That's fantastic. If that's what you want and that's what you want to build and that makes you feel fulfilled, then that's great. If, on the other hand, you want to go build $1 billion company and that is how you are going to measure your success, that's also great. And you can go build your life and align your priorities and actions around that. But the point is to stop accepting the default settings of meaning. Stop accepting the defaults of what culture or society tells you you should want and start thinking about what you actually want and then go building your actions around that.
And I think that gets into a lot of how people can define what their like life's purpose is and meaning in life. Do you have any other like small tips or things you've done for yourself that can help you provide like a framework for what your purpose is?
There's a few frameworks in the book for starting to iron out purpose. There's no secret sauce to figuring out your purpose in life. And to be honest, your purpose is dynamic. It should change in the different seasons of your life. I think your purpose in your 20s is to build a foundation for the rest of your life. And that can be financial. That can also be your networks. That can be relationships, all of those different things. In your 30s and 40s, like my purpose right now is to provide for my wife and son and to be the best father and husband that I can be. And everything that I work on and do is actually in service of that higher order purpose. I want to create positive ripples in the world through my relationships, through the work that I put out, through all of these things. But that purpose shifts. And that's great for it to shift. And the whole point is that your purpose does not have to be your work at any point in time. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And liberating yourself, like unshackling yourself from the idea that you have to find your purpose in your work is a really important mindset shift for most people.
When I think people, they think about the word purpose and they can get kind of turned off because they think that you have to do this huge thing, right? And make a difference in the world and create like massive impact. But I mean, purpose can just be like being the best version of yourself for yourself, or being a great father, being a great husband, just showing up to your 9-to-5 job in the best way possible. I mean, it's all relative.
Yeah, giving back to your community. I mean, I interviewed thousands of people for this book over the last 3 years, and one of the big topics was around purpose in the mental wealth section. And you hear amazing stories. I think it was something like 20% of the people who self-identified as having clear purpose, only 20% of them, the purpose was their job. For a lot of them, it was like, my purpose is to provide for my family. My purpose is giving back to my community, my local church group. Like there were just hundreds of different examples of how people define their purpose. In ancient Indian culture, there's this idea of dharma. And there's an important point in the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of their ancient Hindu texts, where they just say that your dharma doesn't have to be grand or incredible. It just has to be yours. And that is a really important thing when it comes to purpose. It doesn't have to sound impressive to anyone else. The same way your life doesn't have to sound impressive to anyone else. It just has to be impressive to you.
And, I think that one of the things that also traps people is feeling sorry for themselves. And I think that in life, people have had a lot of hardship. There's a lot of things that are just unjustly done to them, right? But at the end of the day, like that's not feeling sorry for yourself just keeps you like in prison, right? I think Viktor Frankl, he talks about like the power of like the mind, right? During like hard situations based on what he went through, right? And he writes about that in this book, The Man's Search for Meaning. Like, what do you think can help people escape the victim mindset?
It's really tough to reconcile sort of bad, blind luck, right? Like this idea that there are things that just happen to us, circumstances out of our control, the way other people have treated us, the circumstances we were born into, that are just unfair. There's no way to describe them. I mean, people getting sick in your family, kids getting sick, wives, partners getting sick, all of these things. It's just like we can't comprehend it. And so it feels so unfair in those moments. And in one of my favorite books, When Breath Becomes Air, the author, who has been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, asks this question of like, why me after this happens? He just is like, I just kept feeling this feeling of why me. And he comes to the answer of why not me? Like, it's just there's bad luck floating out in the world, and this one just happened to land on my head. And the thing that you come to learn is it's all on you. Like that life at the end of the day, it's all on you. No one is handing out anything. No one is going to give you anything. It's just up to you to create the life that you want. And no matter how dark the places that you're in today, no matter where you are, no matter how bad all of the decisions have been that you've made, you just have to make one good decision right now. Like in, I think it was The Martian, Matt Damon in the final scene has this whole thing where he's talking about how he made it home from Mars after getting stuck there. And he talks about just having to solve one problem. He's like, you don't have to worry about the 1,000 problems that are facing you. You just have to solve one problem, and then the next one, and then the next one. And the same thing applies to life. Like, no matter what bad circumstances have befallen you, you just have to solve one problem. Just take one action, and then take the next one, and then take the next one. And you'll eventually crawl your way out of the dark.
Yeah. You're going to be 34 Sunday, right? And if I know you well enough, there's going to be a post that's like 34 lessons, right? I could be wrong. But
I'll send out a newsletter for sure. Yeah, every year.
Thinking about these lessons now, what are the first few that come to mind?
I think there are a few that have hit me really hard in the past year. The first one is a lesson from my grandfather, which is you will achieve much more by being consistently reliable than by being occasionally extraordinary. And I've come back to that over and over again over recent years. We just place so much emphasis on trying to be extraordinary and on hitting the magnificent shot and on like perfection. And the reality is that just focusing on showing up and doing the work, on just doing what you say you're going to do, on just being reliable will get you so much further in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, people are just looking for these quick fixes, these quick highs, when at the end of the day, it's like what really moves the needle is just being consistently good and showing up every single day. It's like, I remember, talking to people about the podcast who have been doing it a lot longer than me or more successful than me, and I just remember them being like, when it comes to like guests and like episodes, like, don't go for the home run, just hit singles and doubles, and that will go way further than trying to hit a home run, because if you're the amount of time it takes to book, a high demand guest, and sometimes like they don't resonate with your audience, and sometimes you have to travel and the money that comes with that if you can just hit singles and doubles like every day, every week, like that's what compounds. It's just it's a tough thing, because those, like, even in the content space, I don't know if you can relate to this, like the adrenaline rush I get if a podcast like does really, really well is, I mean, it's definitely rewarding. And you think about, wow, I wish every episode would hit like this, right?
But then would it feel as good? That would just be your new baseline.
I know. And I don't think it would feel as good.
Yeah.
And because I remember like my big goal like was like, I can't wait to get like 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. And then I did. I was like, oh, now I need 10. And then you hit 10. And then it's like this happiness.
It's the arrival fallacy.
Yeah. And you talk about that. I mean, I think that's a thing that people struggle with, is like, when I get this, I'll be happy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the money trap that everyone falls into. Michael Norton, Harvard Business School professor, did this study where they interviewed high net worth individuals worth anywhere from $1 to $100 million plus and asked them how happy they were on a scale of 1 to 10, and then asked them how much more money they would need in order to be at a 10. And across the board, whether they were worth 1 million or 100 million, all of them said from 3 to 5 times as much money. So like, it makes absolutely no sense, right? Like, we all think we need 3 to 5 times as much as what we currently have in order to get to the idyllic land of happiness and success. And that's just the arrival fallacy in action. It's the idea that we feel like our arrival, the feeling of having arrived, is on the other end of whatever accomplishment we've propped up as our destination. But inevitably we get there and we just reset. And then there's some new site, there's some new summit, some new thing. And so the idea that I try to get across in the book is you have to build the arrival into your journey, because otherwise you're just going to perpetually be unhappy. You'll be convincing yourself that your happiness is on the other side of some achievement, that like, the when then trap of saying like, when I get X, then I'll be happy. And the reality is you either find the happiness on the journey or you will never find it.
I mean, given that you kind of went from the private equity, like finance world, to content creation, have you struggled with like an unhealthy relationship with the highs and lows of social media at all?
I haven't as much, because of deliberate actions that I took. I mean, first off, because of my background in sports, actually, and because of the fact that I wasn't particularly talented, but made my way to a really high level, I learned very early on that the only way for me to be successful at anything I did was just going to be to show up and do the basics every day. And it's funny because everyone asks you for the answer, but then when you tell them the answer, they didn't they didn't really want to hear that answer, because the answer is you just have to show up, right? Like everyone wants, oh, hey, what was the hack at building your audience on Twitter or your newsletter to the size it is today? The hack was just literally that I wrote every single day for the last 4 years. I mean, my newsletter hack, like my newsletter now has 800,000 subscribers. The hack to growing my newsletter was I have not missed a single issue. I've sent 2 newsletters a week every single week since May of 2021. And that takes a whole lot of time, a whole lot of research, a whole lot of things that I was willing to put in. But I knew that if I just showed up and hit those singles and doubles every single time, that it would continue to build and that people would share it. And if they found value in it, I would receive value in return in the form of more subscribers and attention. And that, to me, is just the founding principle of all of this. It's like you have to be willing to do things for a long period of time. I have not had a single piece of content that has like boomed my entire audience. There hasn't been one big like viral moment that led to me building a big platform. It was just a bunch of singles and doubles. And so as a result, I don't feel like I've ever had the like shock dopamine hit that would have been really hard to come back from in terms of like an unhealthy relationship. I also did take very deliberate steps to try to remove myself from the dopamine cycle, in that I don't look at the performance of a post for 24 hours. So I will comment on things, respond to people's comments, etc., but I'm not looking at the performance of the posts during those hours, because I found that when I did, a lot of my like mood would just swing with the performance of something.
I think we may have talked about this during our first conversation, but I think it's an important thing to bring up again. In the conversation related to building something, transforming your life, even social media, is a spotlight effect. And you see this a lot, like with people going into the gym for the first time, where like the biggest fear I think of people is like, are people gonna laugh at me that I don't know how to work the treadmill? Are people gonna laugh at me if I can't bench the bar, or whatever the fears are? Talk about the spotlight effect and why it's important for people to understand that.
Yeah. Most people aren't afraid of failure. They're afraid of what other people will think of them if they fail. You assume that everyone is staring at you and that everyone is focused on you, when in reality, everyone is just focused on themselves. So I've written this before. There are 2 big mistakes in life. One is worrying about what other people think about you. And 2 is believing that other people think about you in the first place. The spotlight effect is this psychological phenomenon that we all overestimate the degree to which other people are noticing or observing our actions and behaviors. We are all egocentric creatures, so we're all just focused on ourselves. And to the extent that anyone is looking at you, they've rapidly forgotten about you to focus on whatever problem they have in their life. And that should be liberating. That should be a call to action to go and do the thing that you are scared of doing, because no one is going to remember it very shortly after. Going back to the book, you have 5, looks like rocks, 5 pillars. It looks like, on the front of the book. Which one's at the bottom? Which is the most important in your opinion? It depends on your life. Yeah, the whole idea is that you build your own balance across these things, and that balance will change. What your rock is and what your main focus is at any point in time will change. And one of the concepts I bring up in the book is this idea that your life has seasons, and what you focus on and prioritize during any one season will change. You will have seasons when financial wealth building is your main focus. You will have seasons when your relationships are your main focus, with your partner, with your children, with your parents, whatever that might be. And you have the ability to be dynamic across those different seasons. You don't have to be fixed in how you approach things across your life.
In all of your research for this book, what's the biggest thing that shocked you?
It's a good question. I asked everyone that I talked to what their ideal day looked like at age 80, and mapped that across all of these responses. And what really blew me away was that we all want the same things, and it has very little to do with money. You go talk to people and ask them what that ideal day looks like, and they basically all say some version of having some freedom, being surrounded by people they love, being focused on things that they care about, having that purpose and meaning, and being healthy. And that doesn't really have anything to do with money. Money may be an enabler to some of those ends, but it's not an end in and of itself. Very few people mention like sitting on private jets or being on yachts or in, mansions or anything like that. They basically want people around them that they love and to be healthy of mind and body. And yet, You ask those people what they are doing today to create those ends, and basically all of them are just chasing money. And so we know what we want on the tail end. We know what the ideal end looks like, and yet we don't take actions in the present to actually build towards that end. And so that is this like cognitive gap that I'm trying to solve with the book. It's like, you know where you're trying to go. So take the actions today that are going to lead you in that direction. Set your compass towards that true north that you've defined for yourself, and then take actions today to actually walk towards it.
Anything else you'd like to add to our conversation that we haven't gotten to?
What I really want people to do is to really just think about what matters to them and then go build their life around it. Stop accepting the defaults that people hand you and start living your life by your own design.
Sahil, this has been awesome. Thanks again for coming back on the show. And I'm sure people are going to get a lot of value, not only from this episode, but your book as well.
I can't wait. Thank you so much.
You got it, man.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.